Landscape photography editing is the last important step in making photographs. And when you sit there in front of your computer with Lightroom or any other post-processing software, the many sliders might seem overwhelming. So in this video I'm going to talk about 5 tips to get you started with editing. Hi, I'm Kim from Landscape to Art. I'm here to help you improve landscape photography with focus on how to develop your skills as a photographer and with less focus on the camera gear and the tech side of photography. If this is your first time here, make sure to click the subscribe button. If you have been post-processing your landscape images for a while, you might have experienced some mixed results. And as with photography in general, it takes more than a good camera and post-processing software to create nice looking photos. And getting reliable and natural result is particularly important in landscape photography. And that's easy because it's people expect from nature, they know what to expect. And for example, if you mess up the colors when you edit, people will immediately know. So when you apply the 5 editing tips I'm sharing with you in this video, you'll have a much better chance to get results that you are happy with. And the last 2 tips are fundamental in photography as such, and not only when you post-process. So let's jump right in and get started. The first point is editing is important. And since you're watching this video, you're likely editing already or you are considering to get started. And there are several reasons you should edit your photos. One which is camera limitations. And your camera tries to make everything as natural and balanced as possible. And in some situations this leads to low contrast photos or skewed colors. And you can adjust these things when you edit. That's a good thing. And if you are unsure if editing is for you, try with a smartphone app first and see if you like it. Photo apps are cheap compared to options for PC and Macs. And there are many good apps on the market, both for iOS and Android. So don't focus too much on the software, just pick one and get started. You don't need the most advanced software when you start to edit, when you start to learn editing. And most software and apps do the exact same things anyhow. And the difference is the interface, which is slightly different between them. So it's much more important to get started and learn the editing process. My second tip is analyze the photo. This is an important step many photographers forget when they start to learn post-processing. Many are way too focused on the sliders and features in the software. And it's like when you first pick up your camera, you're more concerned about all the buttons and settings rather than the scene in front of you. But this step of analyzing the photo is crucial for the results. So before you do anything with the software, take a good look at your photos. And you try to find what are the most obvious problem areas. Identify what is good and what is not so good with the photo. And can you minimize the flaws or remove them or make them look less obvious? Are the colors in the image conveying what you're aiming at? All these things are what you are going to look for before you start processing. When you know what to change in a photo, you are ready to pick the right tools and the sliders for the job. And remember, you don't have to use all the tools. It's not like you have to start at the top and work your way down in the software. Many sliders do exactly the same thing but in a slightly different way. But the results is exactly the same on the images. Tip number 3, always shoot in RAW. You want to get the most out of your photos, don't you? And to make justice to your photos when you post-process, you need the best possible starting point. And this is why you should use and save files as RAW files. And the RAW files save all the image data that the camera sensor captures. And a JPEG file is a compressed file where a lot of the information is already discarded when the file is saved. And it's like diluting a bucket of paint. Once you diluted the paint, it's not able to get back the strong color again. Even if you don't currently edit, I recommend you still save your files in the RAW format. And if you don't, you will never be able to get back the lost image data. I regret I didn't starting to use RAW files earlier. I did not fully understand the purpose of RAW files at the time I got my first camera with RAW capabilities. So I was more concerned about saving space on my memory cards. Software gets smarter and better, and photos that could not be saved in older software versions, you can save them now. And you can save the file as both RAW and JPEG in most DSLR and mirrorless cameras. It takes up a little bit more space, but memory is cheap nowadays. With both file types, you can use the JPEG right out of the camera for posting on social media and internet. And the JPEG files are already edited in the camera. And then you can use the RAW file for serious editing work in more advanced editing softwares. So with the RAW files, you have a lot of image data to work with. Tip number 4 is understanding contrast. If there is one thing in photography that is more important than anything else, it must be contrast. When you hear me talk about contrast now, you might be thinking about the contrast slider in your editing software. But the contrast slider is just one of the sliders you can use to adjust or contrast when you edit. By using contrast and contrasting elements in photos, you can draw viewers' eyes to where you want them in an image. And this is what image editing is about as well, to strengthen this effect. Many of the adjustments you make when you edit is about enhancing contrast in one way or another. And the most obvious contrast in a photo are shadows and highlights. The contrast between the light and the dark tones in a photo. But contrast is so much more. We have color contrast. That means some colors contrast more, like blue and yellow for example, and they are opposite on the color wheel. Green and yellow are neighboring colors on the color wheel and they have less contrast. So the most contrasting you can have is pure black and white. And you must consider all types of contrast when you post-process. So let's take a look at an example in Lightroom. If we look at this image here, which I took in Tuscany, you can see it lacks contrast. It's a very dull image. And I took it early morning at sunrise and there was still some haze on the landscape here. So that's why it looks so lifeless really. And what I can do here now, if I look at the histogram, it also reflects that this is an image with low contrast. You can see it's a huge gap here on the left side, and that means there is no black, pure black in the photo. And there is also a smaller gap on the right side, which means there are no pure white in the photo. So most of the histogram is centered here. That means it's like the middle gray tones of the histogram. So I can add, because I know these trees here are very dark and almost black, so I can make these trees darker. And I do that by using the black sliders, this slider here. And a good tips here is to hold the Alt key while you drag the slider. So I'm holding the Alt key now, and then I'm dragging the slider to the left until I see color appears. And now you can see this yellow green color here, and that's the trees. That's the area with the trees. So and when I see the color, I pull back the slider slightly and let go. And now we can see already that this image has a lot more punch. So if you look at the before and after, it made a total difference only to adjust these blacks with the black slider. And we can also see the histogram now I have closed the gap here, so it means that these are the darkest tones. If I do this with the white slider to try to fill the gap here, something weird will happen. I hold the Alt key again the same way and drag until I see color appearing on the black frame here, like this. And when I let go now, I can see this is a white area, but it looks unnatural and weird. And that's because this area is not totally white, so don't overdo this. So by dragging the white slider until you see the colors on the overlay, it means that I've blown the highlight in this image now. So I have to pull back the white slider until it looks natural. So this is this, the start point and then slightly brighter. So I increase the whites a little bit. That's all I can do with this image to increase the contrast with the black and white sliders. There are of course other possibilities as well, but for this purpose I would like to show you how to use the black and white sliders. So if you look at the before and after now, this is the before, the dull hazy image, and now I added some more black into in the foliage, the trees here, and this looks much better. Adjusting the black and white points is a strong feature you cannot do in a camera. These adjustments alone is a good reason to post-process. And tip number 5, improve composition. You can to some extent improve the composition with post-processing. But when you are new to photography, it can be difficult to nail the exposure when you are out in the field. And it takes a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error. When you're out photographing, you can only rely on the tiny LCD screen. And it's small and it's hard to check image details on the LCD. Whereas on a larger computer screen or even a smartphone or a tablet, it's much easier to evaluate the image. So by editing you can learn about composition, because you can test different versions of your photo where on your computer. And so let's take a look at a few examples in Lightroom. This is an image I took in Italy, in Tuscany, and I purposely positioned the trees in the center here, and it kind of works because there is a lot of empty space around the trees, so the negative space there balances the trees. But if I'd like to test out the composition here, now I can use the crop tool, so the square, the crop tool, and now I can drag the corners of the crop, and I'm now trying to position the trees aligned with the left line here, which is this frame here now, or the squares here are according to the rule of thirds. So we have the trees now, the main subject position on the left line here, and I try to position the horizon on the lower third. So this is how it looks with this composition change. I'm not sure if I like that the trees are on the left side. Maybe we can try to switch them over to the right and see how that works. So we can play around with this. That's the idea with the crop tool and what you can do in post when you edit your photos. I like this better because now the horizon that is level are falling down to the right. It's more pleasing for the eyes to watch the image in this way rather than with the trees to the left. It becomes too much empty space in this area. The other thing we can do here, because the trees here are vertical, so we can try to make this a vertical crop. And I can turn this square by using the X key on the keyboard. So by using the X key I made the frame like a vertical frame. And now if I position the horizon again on the lower third, and this is how it looks. This is things that you need to consider when you post-process. You can do some minor changes, but this is not ideal because when I crop that much the image now, I lose a lot of pixels. So you should try to do this right in the camera when you are shooting the photo. But what I have been talking about earlier is that you can learn by using post-processing. You can learn to see differently. So that's my idea with editing, is that by doing these experiments, moving around the subject, making vertical, horizontal crops, you will learn what to look for when you are out in the field. So that's what I mean by learning composition while you do post-processing. You should try to learn as much as you can about composition. You'll need these skills both when you take pictures and when you edit. Composition skills are what sets photographers apart. And here is a little bonus tip. I have found this to be very helpful when I edit my photos. And that is, always let the photo mature after you have edited. Leave it for a day or two and then come back and finalize the editing. And with a little distance and new eyes, it's much easier to recognize if you have overdone something. And you probably have. I often find myself pulling back on the sliders when I get back to my photos. And remember, edits are supposed to be subtle. If you can tell a landscape photo is edited, you have gone too far. These are my 5 landscape photography editing tips. If you want to learn more about composition in landscape photography, go check out this video. You can also find a link in the description below the video. If you liked the video you just watched, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. I promise to get back to each and every one of them. Until next time, ha det bra, goodbye.